Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Parent Playing Video Games podcast. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VI. It is one of my favorite games of all time, one of my favorite Final Fantasies, probably going to be up there in my top 2-3 Final Fantasies. We're going to go through, of course, the gameplay, we're going to go through the music, time commitment, talk about, speed runs, and of course we're going to consider our kiddable rating of sorts, and of course we're going to conclude it. So it was released for the Super Nintendo in the US way back in October of 1994, and I vaguely remember getting this game a little bit. I remember at the time we were living in Trinidad, and I remember we were waiting for this game to come because games in Trinidad didn't really get released very easily. And I feel like they probably were quite expensive. But I remember my dad had a friend who would travel to and from the US, and he actually brought the game back for us. And I remember my brother and I were super excited to play it. So it was one of those, classic memories of sorts. So, but first, I just want to go over what I was playing. So previous episode, I did mention that I was playing Metroid Prime Remaster, and I'm very close to the end, and I did beat that. Awesome game, tons of fun. Had a lot of fun with it. More fun than I remember having from way back when I played it, and I don't really remember playing it much other than once, maybe twice back on the GameCube. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. Then after that, I actually started up Final Fantasy XII. Now, I'm actually already 11 hours or so into Final Fantasy XII. So I started playing that, got to, I think, I want to say I'm at 18 or so hours right now, and I've kind of put it back down. It's cool. It's a big game, so I think I'm a little intimidated almost by it. I do really like a lot of the systems in the game, but I kind of just, fell out of it sort of thing. I actually haven't played any more of No Man's Sky either. Just like last time, I'm hoping I'm going to play through that either tonight or later on or this week. I do have a lot of time on the expedition. I think there's still 2-3 weeks left on it. And I think I'm on the last phase, so I should be able to get through that, I believe, on my own. And that's actually something I haven't actually looked up anything for that expedition. I've done it all on my own. I'm pretty happy about that. So, however, right now what I'm playing, funny enough, I started playing it and I've now beaten it, was Super Metroid. Because Metroid Fusion came out on the Switch Online, I decided to say, hey, I'll play that. But then I'm like, well, why don't I play, 3, 4, 5? So that's Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Dread. And I didn't really want to do Metroid 1 because I'm not a huge fan of the first Metroid. The Zero Mission remake on Game Boy Advance, absolutely awesome. Really, really enjoy that. If and when that comes to Switch, I will definitely play that. Metroid 2 is cool. I think I played the 3DS remake, but honestly, I was never a big fan of the 3DS. If I did, I didn't play much of it. I did play Metroid 2 for the very first time when I actually first got my 3DS, way back when it first came out. It had the virtual console for the Game Boy, and I actually played and beat it, like the old school original Game Boy version. I quite liked it, actually. I thought it was a neat story and neat gameplay on there. But I decided, hey, I'm going to start with Metroid 3, Super Metroid. I played this game a couple dozen times, I feel, and hundreds of randomizers, I feel, and it's definitely, I always say this, in my top 3 games. I truly do mean that it is in my top 3 games. It's a really, really great game. I love it. And so I played through that, and I actually beat that one this afternoon, which, again, I did it. I think my game time was 1 hour and 41 minutes with 100% item completion. I like getting all the items, and I was really surprised. I did it, and I'm like, oh, I think I have all the items, but maybe I need some more. So I actually looked it up, and it's like, oh, nope, got them all. So that was great. And actually, I didn't have to look up any of the items. I just got them all, and I kind of created my own little route. It is not a speed run by any means, but I do have some speedrun strategies that I learned in there just because I played it so much. I say I'm fairly good at the game. But yeah, I started that and then finished that. Great game. That'll definitely be on an episode for sure. And then I'm going to be probably playing Metroid Fusion after that. I'll probably start that this week. So yeah, that is what I have been playing. Now let's talk about the gameplay. We'll start a little bit, this being a pretty intense RPG. Obviously, there is a story. So with this, the story is about what's called the War of the Magi. So 1,000 years ago, there was an event that happened, the War of the Magi, and pretty much since then, magic kind of died out. Now, in current times, what's happening is that there's this group, the Empire, who have kind of found a way to bring magic back into the world. However, with that, there are some, consequence to it, and, the Emperor starts getting very powerful, and he gets a little dangerous with it. So we're kind of starting our adventure right at the beginning here. There's many, many characters. We'll go through those shortly, but you start off with your characters, they start learning some new things. They, they join a group called the Returners, pretty much people that are, against what the Empire is doing, and they want to actively stop them from taking all this power. So you join up with the Returners, you continue on with this. This part of the game actually is really neat, and I'll get a little bit into it later, but the game actually splits into 3 full parties, so there's kind of 3 stories that happen all at once. Your party gets split. You play one, then you play the next, then you play the next. You kind of get a choice of which one you want to play with first, too. And, not a huge difference. It's pretty early on in the game, so not a big difference. You then kind of get reconnected, and then you kind of go after a character, a bad guy, which I'm going to get into big detail later, called Kefka. And you fight him, you take him down, and then so on and so forth. This story continues on, and eventually, actually... and of course there's spoilers in this, obviously, and we're not going to not spoil this game, but it actually gets to the point that Kefka kind of wins. He destroys the world. It's pretty rare that the villain actually gets what he wants in the game. Other games that we can briefly talk about, Final Fantasy VII, great example. Sephiroth, he calls a meteor, but it doesn't actually hit. Very, very end of the game, it gets stopped. But yeah, Kefka, he actually is able to destroy the world. And so in the game, the world map is kind of divided into 2. So at the beginning of the game, before this event, it's called the World of Balance. And then after this, the World of Ruin. It actually completely changes the map. It does have a similarity to it. There are towns that survive, barely, and they're in the same place on the map. But, maybe you can't get there from the south anymore, that the only way to get there is from the east. And what's cool is that when you get to this part, you have upwards of 12 characters in your party. You can only have 4 in your main party at a time. You can switch them out. And this was actually one of the first games, I think, the first Final Fantasy that kind of did that, where you had different characters that you can switch out willfully or on your own. For instance, in Final Fantasy IV, yes, there are many different characters, but the game kind of just guided you along. And in the story, you happen to have, these 5 characters, and later on this one leaves and another one joins, or vice versa. So in this, though, you get all the characters, and they're all there, as I said, up to that 12 at that point, to play with. And then what happens is the world ends pretty much as we know it, and all the characters are kind of scattered at that point. So now you're a single character again, kind of starting over almost in this destroyed world. You then, go out there and you try looking for your friends. There's clues all over the place. You can, of course, eventually get all of them back in your party. And then you eventually will take on Kefka. I know that's a very, condensed version of how the story goes, but there is a limit of time that I want to put on the podcast. I can't get into a huge amount of detail with it. So that's generally the story. You'll have, as I said, all your characters go fight Kefka at the very end. You beat him. Yay, everyone's good. They saved the destroyed world, sort of thing. And that's the story. Going on to the actual mechanics of the game. So, as I said, there are 4 party members in your party up to at the same time. They have all sorts of different skills, and when in battle, it uses the ATB system. Now, this was first started with Final Fantasy IV. It's the active time battle system. It's probably my favorite way to play an RPG, is that turn-based system, but with a little bit of activeness, let's call it, in there, versus that full-on turn-based that you'd see in the original Final Fantasies, in Lufia, older Breath of Fire, not Breath of the Wild, sorry. So this one here is that as time goes on, every character, your characters, the enemies, they all have a time gauge. And pretty much what happens is, as you're about to choose your selection, if you want to fight, if you want to do magic, use an item, so on and so forth, you'll actually have that timer in the background going, and it's kind of like everyone's turn will get there. And so if you're waiting there, the enemy's going to take advantage of that. Their timer will fill up, and you don't know what theirs is. You don't know where it is in relation to yours. On yours, each character has their own little gauge. So the enemy will just attack, and if you decide, hey, I'm just going to wait here and do nothing, the enemy will just continue attack and attack and attack until something changes. You can have a change on the ATB, so you don't have to have it as active. You can have it as wait. What this means is that if you're in a menu, so if you're in your magic menu, in your item menu, anything like that, the timers will actually just stop for you and the enemy. So if you're a little, trying to figure it out, you're a little bit earlier into the game, that's not a bad way to kind of, I guess, lower the difficulty per se. There's not a difficulty setting with easy, normal, hard, but that's a way that you can kind of, make things a little bit easier, because you can go in there, you can take your time to select and figure out what you want to do. And you can also change the battle speed as well. Now, this is actually fun because the battle speed only changes the speed of the enemies. It is not clear in that at all. You'd think, I'm going to make the battle speed 6, which is the quickest, or 1, which is the slowest. I'm going to make it the quickest to get through the battles quick. That actually would technically be the hardest difficulties, because the enemy speed is so much more. Yours is not changed. You put it down to 1, well, now the enemies are going to be very slow compared to you. So that's, again, another way to change the difficulty kind of thing. If the game were to be made now, that would just be the enemies are slowest and it's on wait is easy, or story mode, right? You go onto the harder difficulties, the enemy speed goes up, maybe they do a bit more damage, whatever it may be. Let's talk more now about the characters in detail to some degree. Again, time limit. So as I said, there's 12 characters before the world ends, but there's actually 2 characters that you get in the world of Ruin. So a total of 14 playable characters, which is even now very high. There's a lot of other Final Fantasies that have done the whole swapping people out at will. I know that 7 does it, 8 I think does it, 9 for sure does it, 10, yeah, for sure. 10 is a cool spin on it, actually. 12, same thing. But I don't know if any of them have 14 total characters. And I think what they did so amazing about this, you might think, 14 characters, that's a lot. That's a lot of characters. So how are they, how can you get attached to the characters? How do you care if one of them does this or does that or dies or something like that? I don't know how they did it with 14 characters, but I would say 12 of them, the last 2 we'll talk about later, but 12 of them, those first 12, they all have really cool backstories to get you attached to them. Now let's dive into those characters. I'm going to be talking about them individually, but then also I'm going to be going over their skills. So first character is going to be Terra. Terra, her skill actually comes later in the game when she learns that she's actually half human, half Esper. Esper are the magical characters of the game. We'll get a little bit into those later. So as I said, later on in the game, she gets a skill. It's called Morph. And pretty much what it does is she's able to morph into her Esper form. Once she's done this, her magic power just shoots up through the roof kind of thing. And when she does this, she's able to cast spells much more powerful, and they will do way more damage, which is awesome. The only thing is you can't just morph at any time. So when you morph, there's actually a little timer that goes down, ticks away, and then once that's done, she is gone back to her human form. And then to get the ability to morph again, that doesn't just come back right away. You actually have to fight, and the more AP that Terra gets, which is a reward from when you do fights, that helps you increase your magic and learn more magic, once that has built up a certain amount, she's able to morph again. Now, the more AP you have, the longer you can be in that morph form. So let's say, for an example, if you don't use it for quite some time, hey, I need to use it on this boss, you can be in there for a while. But if you use it kind of at every chance you get, it's going to last very, very little amount of time, versus on that boss fight, it will last quite some time. So next character is going to be Locke. Locke is a thief, to put it simply. He uses daggers, and he can use boomerangs, and his big skill is going to be steal. So steal is that classic RPG skill. Steal's an item, simple. Later on, he actually can get a unique item that gives him the ability to change his steal into mug. Same thing, steal's an item, however, he gets an attack in there. So you do a steal, attack. Works well because it helps, because each time you do steal, you lose the ability to do damage on that turn for him. So this is kind of puts it together and makes it less of a downside now. Really, at that point, in my opinion, why would you ever fight when you can just always steal as well as fight? Put them together kind of thing. Next character is Celeste, or Celis. Her skill is runic. Back in the day, I didn't really think this was that great. But now, I think it's really cool. It increases the strategy that you can put into the game. So pretty much what it is, as long as she has a pointy weapon, such as a sword or a dagger, doesn't work if she has a boomerang or a rod or staff. I'm not even sure if she can even equip some of those, but as long as she has a pointy weapon, this will work. And pretty much what it does, you select it, she casts it, and all she does is wait. Now, until she actually takes her next turn, others can take their turns. You can flip to them, take their turn, so on and so forth. But what happens is if anyone, either an enemy or yourself, casts a single target or multi-target spell on anyone, runic will kind of, come into play. She'll actually absorb that spell and then absorb how much MP it casts. So if it casts 12 MP to cast from the enemy, she absorbs it and she actually gets 12 MP back. So handy to bring up or to increase her MP. Very useful. The only thing is that if you have a spell that hits everyone, it's not a single target or a single target, made to go to multiple targets, it's not going to do anything. So something like Ultima, high level spell, that's not going to be stopped by runic. It's just going to hit. Next we have Edgar and then Sabin as well. I'm going to put those two together because they are brothers. So they have a unique dynamic there. So what happened was Edgar is actually the king of a castle called Figaro. You see that fairly early on in the game. And Sabin, as I said, is his brother. And pretty much what happened was as the parents died, Sabin had a hard time with that and left. He ran away of sorts, and Edgar had to stay back and take care of the kingdom. Edgar has a command called Tools. You actually get a selection of 8 tools. And these are cool because you just select them. So they're kind of like a unique version of fight. You choose which one you want, you choose what enemy you want to attack, and then there you go. So as I said, there's 8 tools. My favorites happen to be the auto crossbow, and it's just a little crossbow that hits all the enemies on the screen. One of the first times you can use a multi-enemy attack that doesn't cost any MP in the game. So very handy, and it's cool because you can do that from the back row. Quick little explanation of front row versus back row. Front row, you do normal damage, take normal damage. Back row, you do half damage and take half damage unless you have a ranged weapon or magic. So for instance, Edgar uses swords and spears. Well, that's a melee short close range weapon. If he were to just do an attack from the back row, it would be half damage. But if he uses his auto crossbow, well, that's ranged damage. So he can be in the back at this point in the game if that's all you're going to use, and he can still do full damage across those enemies. Auto crossbow, as neat as it is, it does become less useful as the game goes on. It's just not powerful enough to keep up with the enemies. That's where things like drill and chainsaw come in handy. Those are both single target attacks. Drill it's just a big drill. He drills into the enemy, he goes away. And then chainsaw is cool. He'll spin with the chainsaw, do even more damage. It's very, very powerful. However, it has a 25% chance of trying to do an instant death attack. The downside with that is that doesn't work a lot of the time, so you kind of throw away your turn if he gets the instant death version of chainsaw versus the other one. So I generally go with drill simply because it's a little bit more consistent. And now his brother Sabin, he uses blitz, and blitz is kind of a almost like a Street Fighter fighting game skill. In the game, what happens is you select blitz, you put in the specific input. So for an example, the first one, which is pummel, is left, right, left, confirm. You do that correctly, and then it will do that attack. And kind of the downside with blitz is that you don't get to choose who it attacks. It just goes and attacks a random character. So as I said, that's pummel. And also if you do the command wrong, you go, let's say go left, right, right, left, or forget what it is completely, it'll actually just waste the turn. You don't get another chance at it. So it's kind of a bummer. Only until you hit the confirm. If you go left, right, right, left, and then hit, you're like, oh no, I know I messed it up. Go back. You can try again as many times as you want. But if you hit confirm, it's just game over kind of thing. or not game over, sorry, it's just like you've wasted your turn. So again, Pummel's really good on that one. Aura Bolt is really cool. That's kind of like a Hadouken, which is a classic Street Fighter move, of course. That one's neat. It again uses a random attack, but it does a really cool animation, I think. Fire Dance is a really neat one as well. It creates about maybe 6 or 7 different red flaming sabins that go across the screen. And this one's handy because it's the first time you can do multiple damage. Multiple enemies and damage. It's great, but of course, if being fire, if there's a fire enemy, it's kind of useless. And then the last one I really like is Bum Rush. That one's really funny because it's called Bum Rush for one thing, but he actually spins around the enemy a bunch, and that does really, really powerful damage. One thing to note with Sabin as well is that a lot of his blitzes are actually magic-based, so if you actually boost his magic up, he'll actually do more damage. It seems to not make sense, because of course he's a big hulking like bodybuilder guy like that likes to fight, so it makes no sense that most of his attacks are magic power, but it's just how the game is. So I like boosting his magic to get the most out of him. Alright, next is Cyan. He is a samurai, which is a really, really cool class, of course. He to be honest with you, is probably one of the worst characters in the game. His stats are not very good. His speed is the worst in the game, which is hilarious because there's a child in the game, there's an old man that casts magic, and their speed I think is better. So nonetheless, Cyan is a samurai. His unique skill is called Bushido. This one is similar to Blitz in that when you select it, you don't choose who it hits, it just goes. The difference is that instead of having to put in a set of commands to actually get him to do them, it actually just is a timer of sorts, and it's a 1 to 8, and each number corresponds with an attack. The downside is that it takes so long for that timer to go up, and in this time, if you have that active time battle going on, the enemies are just hitting you. That's it. There's nothing stopping them. Again, with his stats being very poor and his regular attack being weak, and then now his Bushido being very slow, I don't think is that great because of that. His backstory is great, but his actual in-battle skills are pretty weak. But again, some of the favorites are Retort, or Sky is what it's called now. Pretty much what that one does is it is a counterattack. So similar to Runic, you cast it, you wait. And if he gets hit during this time, he does quite a powerful counterattack. So really handy in that. But if he never gets hit, you're kind of just sitting there waiting for him to... You're kind of wasting his turn. So if it's like just him on the screen or him and another character, that's a really good one to use. But if there's all 4 of your characters there, you have a 1 in 4 chance to get hit. And then he has Flurry and Tempest. The Quadraslam is the old name. Those ones are the same, except one is a level, I think, one's level 4 and one's level 7 on that gauge. So really all it does is that it hits 4 random characters. Now if you do the Tempest, which is the more powerful one, it's just more powerful. Versus Flurry it's okay, but again, the downside with this again is that it's hitting random characters, and if you're in the back row, it does half damage. So you have to be in the front, you have to do all that. It's just, and again, getting up to that 7th one takes a very, very long time, so I don't particularly think it's worth it. So again, Cyan's definitely low tier on the list. Alrighty, so Shadow is our next character. Now Shadow is just cool. He is a mysterious character. You don't see his face. It's cloaked by his head wrap, and he's a ninja, which everyone loves ninjas, right? So he is a kind of a glass cannon. He can equip 2 weapons when you have the certain item, the Genji glove, I think it is, or Genji glove, I'm not sure on the pronunciation. So you can have 2 swords or 2 daggers, and he can do big damage with that. His special skill, though, is throw, and that one's cool because you can throw ninja stars, you can throw skeins, which are elemental, so there's fire, water, lightning, that kind of thing, and they're just pretty much an elemental damage that hits every character or every enemy. And I think that's great because if you know an enemy's weak against lightning, throw the lightning one, takes a good chunk of their health away. He also has a sort of secondary thing, which he is a dog called Interceptor. The dog isn't in battle with you, but every now and then Shadow will kind of do almost like a block, and it'll show Interceptor's face, and he'll come from off screen all the way across, and he'll give the enemy that hit Shadow a bite, and then run off again. And usually that damage is quite high, so really handy. And the nice thing is that Shadow won't actually take damage at that time either. It's almost like Interceptor's jumping in front of him and then, responding kind of thing. Gao is our next character. Gao is an interesting character. He kind of has two special things. It depends on where you are in the game. So there's a big field in the game called the Veldt, and that is where any enemy that you've ever fought will appear on the Veldt. So, and the reason being is that Gao's main special is called Rage, and what that does is you can kind of like impersonate an enemy of sorts that you've seen on the Veldt. So when he's on the Veldt, he gets a skill called Leap. So you go into battle, you leap on the enemies, it ends the battle. You fight several battles more, you see Gao, he rejoins your party. Simple way to put it. While he's away, though, he's learned about the enemies that you fought. So you can do this over and over and over again, and you can get some really, really cool things, or cool skills through his Rage. The downside is, though, is that when you choose a Rage to use, he may not always do the more powerful attack. Let's say if he's doing Stray Cat, he may not do Cat Scratch. He may just do a normal attack, which is okay, but Cat Scratch does tons of damage. Like when you're doing like 100, 150 damage, Cat Scratch may do 1,000 damage, so that's huge. But there's two things. One, it's like Blitz. It's like Bushido. You don't choose which enemy it hits. And two, while he's doing his Rage, you cannot control him. He can't stop. He can't heal. The only way he'll ever stop is if he dies or the battle ends. Now, I like consistency, and I'm not a huge fan of unpredictability in the game or in the fights. So Gao, as cool as it is, some of his Rages are fantastic. Most of them are absolute crap. So if you want to, you can put in the work and put in the grind to get the good Rages, but it does take a very long time. Setzer is next on our list. Setzer is he's a cool character, got a cool backstory. He's a gambler, and he also is the owner of the only airship in the world. So he's a pretty important character when you think of it, when you need to get around. He has his weapons are actually dice, or cards, because, you know, gambling, casino, that kind of thing. The dice are a very interesting kind of mechanic of weapon. You roll it and it's just random, pretty much. It's not like you do, it's not like a weapon with, 80 damage on it. It's just like, it's low, it's just whatever it is, and whatever the dice rolls is pretty much what it gets. It does some multiplication, that's your damage. But if you get, all ones, you do some pretty low damage. But if you get all sixes, yeah, you can do a lot of damage. But again, it's random. And as I've said, I don't like unpredictability. His special skill, though, is slots, which is similar sort of idea. You can get 3 sevens, gives you lucky 7, does some magic damage. You can get 3 of his airship symbols, the high wind. Sorry, no, that's Final Fantasy 7. I can't remember what the ship's called, but you get 3 of the ships, and then it actually calls in the airship for like a bombing strike. You can also get one where it kills the enemies, just kills them. And that one works on every enemy, I believe, including, I think, the last boss. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it even does most, if not all, bosses. But then on the flip side, you can get one where it does the exact opposite, and it kills you. And it's completely unavoidable. So if you get that, it's game over. And that time, it's actually game over. Next is Realm. And Realm is a small girl who is the granddaughter of Strago. So I'm going to do similar with Edgar and Sabin. This is Strago and Realm. Realm, she is an artist. And so she has the ability to sketch. And that one's cool because what she'll do is let's say you're fighting any enemy, she'll do the sketch command. If it's successful, which it isn't always, she'll do that, and then she'll kind of sketch the enemy out, and then they'll do one of their attacks on themselves, kind of thing. So let's say if it's a bomb or a balloon enemy, those fireball things, you do that, it'll do a fire attack on the enemy in front of them. Now, of course, that's kind of useless because the bomb is fire, so it'll probably just heal them. But then you can get an item later on, again, similar where it goes from steel to mug. You get something where you can control. What that does, she does that, and now the enemy is actually under her control. So when her turn shows up, you're not using Realm anymore. You're actually using the enemy, and you can select which attack to do, and then attack on either your party, which would be silly, or of course one of the enemies that's elsewhere on the screen. That one's really cool because you can actually get some really neat skills or neat damage from doing that. The only downside is Realm is fairly weak outside of all that. She doesn't really have good, her magic is very good. But you already have 2 really good magic people. That's Terra and Celis. So I was like, well, if you already have 2, do you need a third? Now, Strago, her grandfather, he uses lore, which is blue magic, which has come up in other games, other Final Fantasies. It's pretty much like enemy magic. So, for instance, an enemy will cast a spell, a unique spell. If it hits Strago, and he survives, I think he has to survive, he will learn that magic, and then he can use that going forward, just cost MP, and then there you go. So that one's really cool, but Strago is kind of similar to Cyan. He's just a crap character overall, so the blue magic, as neat as it is, there's many other things I'd use ahead of that, so it's kind of like I don't know, I just don't really care. Now, I'm going to go back to Shadow a little bit, in that Realm and Shadow have a relationship, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I believe that Shadow is actually Realm's father. And this is where the game has a really cool storytelling, is that to learn more about their relationship, you actually have to sleep at all sorts of different inns around the world, and then randomly, if you have Shadow in the party, there will be dreams that will expand on their backstory kind of thing. Again, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's father-daughter. So yeah, one day I'll see all the dreams. I remember seeing a couple, but I haven't really, again, it's a massive game in that case. I haven't really grinded to get all that. Now, the last playable character in the world of balance is Mog. Mog is a Moogle, which is a very, very common character in the Final Fantasy series now. I don't know if Moogles existed before this, if he was the first, or if there were others. Again, not too sure off the top of my head. So Mog is one thing, very cute, but his special skill is dance. So there's 8 dances. Now this one's really cool because it all is based on the environment. So if Mog fights in a field, he will learn the dance that is associated with that field, with that environment. If he dances in a cave, same thing, dances in the snow. Fights in those places, he'll learn them. And then what happens is when you choose one of the dances, one of those 8, it actually changes the background. So let's say you're fighting in a cave and you say, well, I want to do the dance that's of the field. It'll actually change the background to that. And also when Mog does the dance, if it's not the one of where he is, so if he doesn't do the cave one, he does the field one, and he's in the cave, he may stumble. It's not always 100%. Anyway, when he does the dance, it goes through, and then he has a chance, similar to Gao, when he's doing this, you can't control him. It won't stop until he dies or the battle ends. And pretty much what happens is he will do one of 4 attacks that is based off of that dance, so based off of the field. So it may have a healing attack, it may have a damage attack, may have a damage on everyone attack, all sorts of different things. One thing that's really interesting is that if you don't do a very specific thing in the world of balance before the world ends, you can only get 7 of the dances. You can only get one of the dances in one very specific area, and it's kind of a long trek and a pain to do it, so it is something that probably gets missed a decent amount. So that is the 12 playable characters that are all in the world of balance. Now, when you get into that world of ruin, and then you start, kind of going around and collecting the characters again, there's 2 more characters that you can get, and that is Gogo and Umaro. So Gogo is up in an island on the northeast called Triangle Island, and you actually get eaten by this big, almost like sandworm thing. You get eaten, and then you're inside its belly, and it's like a dungeon. You get through the end of it, you get to Gogo, and then there you go. Gogo joins your party. Gogo, no one knows who Gogo is, what Gogo is, anything like that. The big thing that Gogo can do is that it can mimic. And so let's say if Sabin does his big bum rush blitz, you can do mimic, and what happens is that whatever the command that happens right before you choose mimic, the command that happens right before he does mimic, he'll just do again. So let's say you do bum rush, you do mimic, he'll do bum rush, even though he can't actually do it, but he can mimic it doing it. You can also completely modify his fight menu and change things up in there. So you can throw more things on there as well as the mimic. So that one is a challenge to get right, because again, same sort of thing. He doesn't really do much else than that. So yeah, Umaro is found in some mountains. He right off the bat auto attacks. All he does is attack. You never even see his menu. You can equip a couple different items for his attacks to change a little bit, get a little bit more powerful. He is quite powerful. He can take a hit, but again, because he is auto-attacking all the time, he kind of is less versatile. So now instead of having 4 characters that maybe can throw a potion out there or an elixir or something like that, you have 3. Again, he can do some good damage, but he attacks something randomly, unpredictable, so on and so forth. So earlier I did mention with Terra about what espers. So espers are that magical being in the world, and they live in their own world sort of thing. The worlds do connect. That's how magic comes around. Now, at some point in the game, later on, you're actually able to kind of equip espers. They become what's called magicite, which is kind of the crystallized form of an esper. So when you have them, there's up to 27 in total in the whole game. There's one that you either turns into a sword or an esper. I'll mention that in a minute. But pretty much what it is that you equip the espers, and when you have the espers on there, as you fight battles and you get AP, you will learn the spells that esper can provide to you. So, maybe it's like Cure and Fire, or Lightning, whatever it may be. Each esper has its own thing. The higher level and the later end game espers is that they'll have really, really cool spells, really unique spells, such as Ultima, which, as I said earlier, is that big, high damage everyone attack. Quick, which allows you to do 2 turns in one go. Those kind of things are, the higher end. They take more time to learn, so on. Also, when you have an esper equipped on someone, you can only have one equipped at a time on each person. Is that in the battle, one time only, each battle, you can summon them. So that's the summons of this game. They're called so many different things across the Final Fantasy series. In this one, they're called espers. Now, as I mentioned, there is one Ragnarok. You can either, at one point, you can turn it into an esper, into magicite, and then equip it, and that's how you learn Ultima. And as I said, Ultima is that fantastic spell. So, again, the downside is that you convert it to the magicite, you now have Ultima. But when you summon it, it does something called metamorphose, or metamorphosis, and pretty much what it does, it transforms the enemy that you're fighting into an item. There's very, very few times that this is actually useful, in my opinion. So the summon isn't really the important thing, but the learning of Ultima is something that's really important. When you turn it into the weapon, yes, it's a fantastic weapon. It isn't the best weapon in the game, but it's definitely, I think, in the top 3. So, but you do that, but then you now can't learn Ultima. However, you can learn Ultima in different ways. I think there's a specific shield that you can equip called the Paladin Shield, which is actually the Curse Shield originally, and then you have to... There's a whole thing to make it the Paladin Shield. That allows you to learn Ultima, I think. So even if you don't have the Esper, there's still ways to learn it to some degree. And then... that was it for Espers. That's pretty much all I want to talk about. That again, there's a lot to talk about on them. As I said, there's 27. I don't have the option or the time to go through them all. Some of the classics are in there, Ifrit and Ramu, Shiva, the Sirens in there, and Bahamut. Those ones are all there, the classic ones. I don't know when they all came in. I know Final Fantasy IV had summons with Rydia as the summoner, so I know a lot of those ones are in there. So, again, there's some great ones in there. They teach you the spells, and they have some passive skills or passive abilities improvements as well. So there's one more thing I wanted to kind of talk about when it comes to fighting, is there's something called desperation attacks. Now, this is kind of the original limit break, Final Fantasy VII and many other games since, is that when you take a certain amount of damage, you can do your limit break. So the desperation attack, so it's a kind of like a formula of sorts, is that when you're critical, which is when you're crouched down, your health is low. I believe it's when you have 1/8 health. You have a 1 in 16 chance of doing the desperation attack when you choose the normal sort of attack command. Now, these are ultra powerful. Like, they can take out a lot of enemies, do huge damage. But again, the chance of that when you're critical, so you have to be low on health, so you're maybe 1 or 2 hits away from dying. And you have a 1 in 16 chance of when you just use the attack command. And that's actually probably the least used command when I play. The command that I would use are, like Bushido and Blitz, tools, and just using magic in general, but just attacking. Generally, I play the game not with that, so I've only ever seen, I think, 1 or 2 myself just playing the game. I did watch a YouTube video of all of them in there. I thought that was, cool. They have cool names, and like they're all relative to the person that's doing it. It's not just like they're all doing the same kind of thing. They're all pretty unique. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that if you're interested in that. Next, I want to talk about some specific bosses in the game. And the first I want to mention is Ultros. Now, Ultros is an octopus, And the first time you see him, you actually see him several times throughout the game, I think 3 or 4 times, and he is funny. Like, you'll hit him with fire, and he's, he's like, oh, I'm a cooked squid, or, you'll hit him with Saban's punch, and he's like, some muscle-bound bodybuilder guy. Like, he has some funny quips, and the more times you see him, he just has more and more funny things to say, kind of thing. He eventually gets a buddy called Typhoon, who is gross because he sneezes on you and he kind of kicks you out of the battle. But Ultros is a really funny character. Phantom Train. So the reason I'm bringing this up is the train's one thing. You're actually fighting a moving train, so you're running the whole time in front of a train. So you guys can run real quick. But the really cool thing that I bring this up is that Saban has another blitz that I didn't mention earlier called Suplex. And I mean, pretty much what it does, he jumps, grabs the enemy, lifts them up, and slams them down. He jumps off the screen, slams them down upside down. You can suplex Phantom Train. So in a lot of the times on speed runs at Games Done Quick events, which is a biannual event to raise money while doing speedrunning, they almost always, if this is being played during an event, people will always vote to have the train suplexed. It takes time, it wastes time, but it's a very funny and confusing way to attack an enemy. The next one that one of my favorite enemies because of the music with it, which is absolutely amazing, is the Atma weapon, and that is a sort of it's a mythical and magical beast that is on the floating continent in that sort of halfway point of the game that is a very difficult boss fight, and he does tons of different attacks and tons of damage and all that stuff, and just great music, great fight, like really intense. And one of the cool things about that fight is that actually if he has 0 MP, he dies. So there's actually a strategy to do a spell called Osmos, which absorbs MP, or Rasp, which just kind of attacks MP sort of thing. They don't do a massive amount. He has a large amount, but that's actually a legitimate strategy on how to actually kill the enemy. And because it's a mythical beast of magic, I guess behind the story of it is that if there's no more magic in him, no more MP, it dies. It has no life force sort of thing. Another one that's neat, I guess another 8, is the legendary dragons. In the World of Ruin, there are 8 legendary dragons, and they're all the kind of, the elements. There's the wind dragon, storm dragon, fire dragon, ice dragon, earth dragon, all that stuff. They're all quite difficult fights. They're scattered around the world in the World of Ruin, so you have to kind of hunt them down, because once you defeat all 8, you actually get the Crusader Magicite, which teaches you some pretty unique spells. So it's cool. If you want to get all the Espers, you have to, find all those legendary dragons. And as I said, they're not easy. And then, of course, Kefka. We've already talked about him a few times. He is a horrible, horrible person, an amazing villain because he wins, and he's a psychopath, to be honest with you, and he's a clown. And the final boss, I think technically the final boss is something like 15 to 18 different actual bosses all in this massive tower. And so you get to the base of the tower, you fight the, let's say the 3 or 4 that are there, and then the screen shakes up to the next level, and so on and so forth until you get to Kefka. And again, because of that, it's like I want to say a 20-minute boss fight, because the music, it's called Dancing Mad. That is a 20-minute track, and it is amazing from beginning to end. So the way it goes through, there's different segments of it because it depends on how long you're on each fight, but it is a really, really long fight and a very challenging fight if you're not prepared for it. He's a great evil character and a great final boss for sure. So okay, now we're going to talk on music. I spent quite a long time on the gameplay and all that stuff, but let's talk a little bit about the music. Now, on this one here, the composer for the music is Nobuo Uematsu. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that correctly, but if I'm not, I do apologize. He is my favorite composer of all time. He did the majority of the Final Fantasies, I believe up until, I want to say 10. He may have been working on 12, but he has been sort of a consultant of sorts for a lot of music. The Final Fantasy VII remake, for example, he did the original music. He was involved in the remakes music because that music is just top tier as well, like the way they redid some of those classic sounds or songs. Same thing with things like the Pixel remasters. I know he's involved with things still, so he is definitely easily my favorite composer. Final Fantasy music is my favorite video game music ever. He really pushed the Super Nintendo to the limit, and with that one specifically, there's a opera house scene. And to get into the detail a little bit, the group has to kind of play in the opera, and Celeste actually looks just like Maria, who is the actress who has been kidnapped actually by Setzer. Again, the story is really cool, and it's hard to get into in a short amount of time, but pretty much the opera house scene is fantastic. There's all sorts of different tracks in it. They're all really good, and then you actually sing as Celis in the opera. Now, of course, it is not English, it is not voice acted, but you actually go through it, and she's singing, and it's a very emotional song. Just not even the main story of it, but for me personally, the reason is that when we played the Super Nintendo and had it many years ago, we eventually got rid of it, and I eventually got a new Super Nintendo, and I eventually got, I was playing on the PlayStation, I should say. So I was playing on the PlayStation, and I finally got Final Fantasy VI. I was so excited, and I was playing it, and I was loving it, except for those load times, but most of the time I was loving it. And then when it got to the opera house scene, it hit me so hard. It just took me back to when I originally played it, and it's something that has stuck with me, and I feel like that happened for me in, I want to say, either the late 90s, early 2000s. Here we are, 2023, and I still feel the same way when I hear that music in the game, and especially the Pixel remasters. I haven't fully watched it because it's something that's so important in my heart, is that I don't want to watch that. I want to experience it. So that's part of why I'm so excited to play the Pixel remasters when it does finally come out for the consoles in springtime here, and I think that will take me back to that moment when I played it on the PlayStation to when I played it originally, and I think it's going to be something really fantastic for me. So as I said, he pushed the Super Nintendo to limits with that. He was met with restrictions, but he did so many good songs. And as I said, Dancing Mad is a 20-minute long song. Now, onto some of my favorites. So the opening theme is just super great, to put it simply. But when the opening theme happens in this game, it uses that Super Nintendo Mode 7 graphics, where it's kind of behind three characters heading towards the first town in the game. And the song that comes on is just so good, and it matches the tone so well that it really makes you feel like you're going on this adventure, but it's also a very soft and gentle song, so it's kind of leading you into kind of the unknown sort of thing. The next song is it comes up on my playlist all the time, of my video game playlist, and I seem to listen to it every single time. It's called Slam Shuffle, and it's actually the song of a town called Zozo, which is a really neat part of the game, where it's kind of like they say, well, you can't trust anything that anyone says in Zozo. So everyone's lying to you, and you have to take all those lies and figure out the truths from it. So it's a neat part of the game. There's rain going on all the time, so it kind of fits that really well. Devil's Lab is a really cool song. So this is part of what's called the Magitech facility part of the game, where you're going in a really, again, cool part of the game, similar to Slime Shuffle. And I think maybe that's why I like these songs so much, because I like the parts of those parts of the games. And so Devil's Lab is really cool. It's got a really punchy sound to it, and it fits the area of the game very well. And finally, Dancing Mad, as I said, just a very good and very long song, but really quite fitting, especially the name, fitting for the final boss with Kefka. Okay, so now we're looking at the time commitment. So this one here, if you're interested in it, that's awesome. However, it is a very long game, especially for the Super Nintendo. When we look at that how long to beat, we're looking at the main story of 35 hours. That's a lot of time. I mean, as I say, if you can get, a couple hours a night, that's great. But even, let's say, at 2 hours a night, even 3 hours a night, you're looking at, 2 2 weeks minimum of just, this is all you're playing for 3 hours a night to get just through the main story. It's a big game. You go on that completionist part of things, we're looking at 63.5 hours. That's massive. That's even big for these days. I actually just saw an article about Final Fantasy 16 is going to take 30 to 35 hours to beat, and then something like 70 or 80 hours to complete. That's pretty much on par with this, and this is from 1994. So again, it's a lot of commitment for sure. It's a great game to get into. It is something that I think can grab a lot of people if you're interested in the kind of classic JRPGs with that turn-based. I know a lot of people aren't too keen on that, especially nowadays, because you have a lot of games that are not like that. You have more action RPG games, so you kind of want to be doing something all the time. So I can understand that. Again, me personally, I do like those turn-based games. So yeah, the How Long to Beat definitely is a good indication that it is a long game. And there's a lot of reading in it. There's no voice acting. So if you're a fan of having the voice acting but not the reading, it makes it a little bit more of a adventure, let's call it. Maybe not the best for someone who isn't really looking to read too much. Now on the flip side, the speed run of it. Now again, speed run of a classic JRPG sounds ridiculous. So we've got a couple categories. I mean, it's quite a few, but the ones that I'm kind of want to point out. We have any % glitchless, any % sketch, and Kefka and Narsh. Now the any % glitchless, any % sketch are actually, the world record is held by the same person. It's Dine_Nutari. I think I'm saying that correctly. Any % glitchless is 4 hours 59:45, and sketch is 2 hours 29:52. 3 hours 29:52. Now, again, as I said, the main story from How Long to Beat is 35 hours, and this person has done it in less than 5 hours with no glitches. I generally have no clue how. And again, to have that dedication to play a massive game over and over and over again when the speedrun records are, well, the world record's 5 hours. Most people are doing it in much more than that. With Sketch, that one there uses a glitch, that Realm, with her sketch ability. I don't know the exact details of it. It's pretty much a glitch that allows, obviously, things to change in that because it's about an hour and a half, almost to the exact hour and a half quicker than the any % glitchless. Now Kefka and Narsh is quite unique. So there was actually a tournament a few years ago now, several years ago, where that one, what it is that part of the game to get to Kefka at Narsh, where, remember I said the groups kind of split and then they eventually get back together. When they get back together is when they actually fight Kefka at Narsh, and you're like, oh wow, you're fighting the final boss so early. I mean, you are, but also you're not. He's not really the final boss at that point, kind of thing. He's just like, you dispatch him, but you're not killing him at that point. So that one actually has been held by Toru-1988 as the person with that record for 1 hour 21 and 55. Now what's really neat about that one versus, let's say, an 90% glitchless is that the strategy changes a little bit. On 90% glitchless, you may need to go to certain places to get, a specific item or do a certain thing to, advance later in the game. Whereas at Kefka and Narsh, you're kind of like, well, I don't care about later in the game because I'm only playing up until this point. So you're able to have different sort of strategies, which probably end up being quicker because you just don't need to worry about, later past Kefka and Narsh kind of thing. Okay, now onto the kiddable section of the game. So, I'll start off. The controls are simple. It is a 2D game. You have up, right, down, left kind of thing. So you don't have a huge amount of complexity with that. The blitzes can be tricky. I mean, even I have some troubles with it, sort of thing. I do believe in the pixel remasters, the blitzes, when you choose blitz, you choose which one you want to do, and then it shows you what you need to press at the top of the screen. And I think that's really a nice quality of life improvement because I can't remember all the blitzes because I only use a handful. Well, if I want to use one that I don't use all the time, I'm like, well, what is that again? I have to kind of scratch my head, and then there's no reference point in the original game or even, remakes of it. So you kind of have to, just know them all or have them written down somewhere. But this, with the blitzes on the pixel remaster being at the top, kind of nice. The story is quite intense. There's a lot of reading. Again, this is pre-voice acting. You have to read a lot of things. So this is where it may be a little bit less attention grabbing for a kid, they may need to be older, is really what it comes down to. They have to be invested in the story to actually continue. Just like any book. If you're not really keen on the book, are you going to finish it? This is a book with the video game on top of it, kind of thing. So there's a lot of reading. Now, if you, if let's say the kid wants to actually learn more reading, I think it's a good option in that sense. I know of a lot of people who have either learned English by playing Final Fantasies or actually learned some Japanese by playing Final Fantasies. And I think that's really neat. I mean, I actually tried a little bit one time, a long time ago, to try and learn the Japanese version of it, and it just flew right over my head. I couldn't figure it out, sort of thing. The story is fairly linear. There are some side quests. So when it comes to linear stories, I personally like that more because it gives me that direction of, go here, then here, then here, then here. Again, it's a book. You read from, the beginning of the book to the end. If you have a whole bunch of side quests, you get halfway through the book, and now you can choose one of 7 other books to read through. And then this is the main one, but the 7 other ones look good too. It's like, that's a bit much for me. In the World of Ruin, it does get very open in that sense. The very beginning, it's quite linear, but yeah, later on in that World of Ruin, it isn't. However, once you get there, you kind of have a good feel of the game, so you're not kind of lost and trying to stumble your way through everywhere. So I think that helps. The ATB system, as I said earlier, because it can be set to wait, and because you can set your battle speed to the slowest, and again, that only affects the enemies, I think that helps a lot with that difficulty. It allows anyone, kids, adults, whoever it may be, to be able to kind of think about what they want to do as their decision. They don't have to kind of make quick decisions because, they're getting attacked. So I think that helps a lot because, again, it kind of lowers the difficulty in some way. You can play it on a lot of modern consoles as well, so you don't have to go out and buy a Super Nintendo. It is on I think it's on the Super Nintendo Classic. The Pixel remasters are all available as of right now, iOS, Steam, and as I said, it's going to be on PlayStation 4 and Switch in the spring. And then they're also on Android as well, the Pixel remasters. So I think that would be the best way to play it right off the bat. Just because, again, the quality of life increases, and being able to play on a modern console, I think, is a very big and important improvement. There is co-op in the game, and I think it's actually a really neat one because what it is that during the story, outside of battle, it's single player. There is no co-op, there's no 2-player, nothing. It's all single. But in the battles, what can happen is, let's say you have your 4 slots, and your 4 characters. Let's say just call them from the top to bottom. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. What you can do is in the main menu, you can go to the config. You'd say, hey, I want to play 2-player, and you say, well, player 1 controls 1 and 2. Player 2 controls 3 and 4. And so that's neat because then what you can do is you can put, let's say I'm playing with, my boy when he gets old enough to actually play this. Oh, that reminds me. He is not 2 months old. My wife pointed this out. I said 2 months old last time. He's 2 years old in a couple days, actually. So, yeah, there you go. Make sure he's the right age. That's how he can try and play games right now. So, yeah, when he's a little bit older, he can play. And let's say he really likes Edgar and Celis. He really likes those characters. Well, I can put Edgar and Celis in slot 3 and 4. I can then have player 2 be on slot 3 and 4. So in battles, he gets to control them. And I'm right next to him, so I can help him if he has any questions or wants some advice, or if he just wants to do it on his own. He's there. I'm also there with my characters to support his characters. So if he makes a choice and maybe gets a little bonk on the head and needs some health or healing, well, I can go ahead and heal him. He can focus on attacking because that's always going to be more fun, and then I can focus on the healing side of things. So the co-op is not the greatest, but it's also a really neat way to do it because if it was just 2 adults, the second adult's going to get bored because they're not doing anything but fights and only 2 characters in the fight. They're like, I don't really care. But with a kid is that they can enjoy the story. We can read it together, go through it together, make decisions together, but I'm the one controlling, so they don't have to worry about the controls. And then when it gets to the fights, they're actively, helping me, I think is a great way to put it, is that they're going to help, take down those enemies versus just me being there and them telling me what they want to do. So I think that's fairly kiddable in that sense. Okay, so now we're at the conclusion. I think it was fairly obvious in my talking of this game. This is 10 out of 10. I know last time Super Mario World was 10 out of 10. This is a 10 out of 10. I'll be honest, I'm going to review games that I enjoy and quite like. There's a really good chance quite a few of them are going to be 10 out of 10, but that's okay. And it is one of my top Final Fantasies, for sure. Top 3. This, 4, 7. I mean, heck, even 7 remakes up there. It is so incredible good. Anyway, so Final Fantasy 6, 10 out of 10 for me. The music is some of, if not the best in the whole series. I would say it has the most amount of great tracks. There may be some songs from other games that have great tracks. This one has the most amount of great tracks. So many are so good. The characters all have great backgrounds. As I said, except for Gogo and Umaro, those two are kind of very watered down and thin. They're, a tea with the tea bag in there for 4 seconds kind of thing. They're pretty light. Where every other character has an amazing background, really cool stories. I wish I could get into it, but honestly, I did that for the good chunk, and I had about almost an hour just on the character stories. I didn't want to make this a 2-hour plus long episode. It would have been too much. So if we ever want to go through that, maybe I'll go through and put something out there for that. The gameplay, classic Final Fantasy. It is the classic JRPG, ATB. It is what I grew up with. As I said, we grew up with the Super Nintendo in the house. We had Final Fantasy 4, which started with the ATB. We had Final Fantasy 6, which just took everything of 4 and just like punched it up to 11 kind of thing. And it just, everything was so good with it. And it's, when I play, I know I said Final Fantasy 7 Remake is fantastic. I really enjoy it. And I do. The combat is still something that's tricky for me. Final Fantasy 15, I played, I think, 15 hours of that. I could not figure out the combat, to be honest with you. I was never successful with it. So the action RPGs were always a challenge for me. So I like the classic turn-based RPGs. And that's going to do it for this episode. So I would like to, of course, thank you very much for listening. Again, next episode is going to be in that 2 weeks. I'm enjoying the 2 weeks. It gives me some time to play some games, but also some time to, do many of the other life things. So yes, in 2 weeks we'll have that. I will also continue ending with a dad joke. Where do generals keep their armies? In their sleeveys. That one I actually saw recently, and also my wife knew it as well, so that makes it even more fun. So, with all that said, I would like to again thank you again. Give your kids a hug if you don't have a kid. Hug someone you love. Stay well, and we will see you next time. Thank you.